Okay, we'll make a start. So, probably a month or so ago, I think Neil had been bugging me for a while, including me on some emails regarding Warpstock and hinting strongly that perhaps I could do something. So, I had a few weeks off a month or so back, and I started looking at time zones and things to see with daylight savings here, starting here and ending in the US, what time it would be and whether there was any possibility of participating. And so once we resolved that, yes, if I got up early, then it was possible for me to be here. We started talking about topics, and I guess porting software was the obvious topic. So, in the time we've got, there's no attempt in these slides to teach someone how to compile a piece of software. It's the amount of time we've got, and with the being how many thousand miles away it is, it's just not possible. But what I tried to do is put some background in on a little bit about me, because I guess some of you in the room, we've exchanged emails and things, but most of you probably haven't seen a photo or know anything about me. So a little bit about me, um, how I got started in porting software, um, things other people can do to start porting software, because um, a lot of people think they can't port software. And later in the slides I talk about Albert Pol from the Netherlands, who thought he couldn't build software and since has built about 200 Qt ports and a whole bunch of command line ports. So anyone who thinks they can't port software, frankly, is full of shit. uh, so I've got a little bit about that, some stuff on bug reports, I guess a slide on what I consider some of the things I'm proudest to have worked on. I know Lewis had some differing points of view, but I guess it's my opinion. Some stuff as well about challenges. I probably should flick to the next slide, because I think I've got an agenda, haven't I? Haven't I, Neil? Yes, I've just got to work out how to do that here. Look, I can see the same thing here now. So how I got started, how to get started, some resources for new porters. For people who really think they can't port, what can they do to help people that are porting? Some stuff on bug reporting, challenges in porting and future challenges, and questions. And I think the thing I'd like to stress is, if people have got questions, interrupt me, stop me. Happy to make this interactive, because I don't love the sound of my own voice. So. And I'm keeping an eye on the NetLabs channel on IRC, so if there's questions from there, I'll try and cover those as well. So next slide, Neil. So background, hopefully. Okay, so I was born in the UK. We came to Australia when I was 2 in 1977. Lived in Adelaide. Married to Julie, who's got 2 golden retrievers. They're our kids. By qualification, I'm a chemical engineer. Oh, nearly lost you. So I'm a chemical engineer by qualification. I've got no formal qualifications in programming, and in actual fact, I don't really consider myself a programmer. I consider myself a hacker. In terms of a job, I'm the quality manager at Holden Vehicle Operations, which is the Australian division of General Motors, which will exist until 2017 when they close the plant. So we build the Chevrolet SS and also the Chevrolet Caprice police patrol vehicle, which are exported to the US, and previously built the Pontiac G8 and the Pontiac GTO with the 2-door coupe. As I said, no formal qualifications in programming. Back in the day in high school, we had a bunch of BBC micros that I think we used BASIC on them. I really can't remember now. It's too long ago, and too many beers and red wine since then. And we did a little bit of Pascal in second last year. And in first year engineering, it was a mandatory first year engineering subject that we did a computer science type subject that was about 10 weeks of C programming and 4 weeks of how to use, back in the day, I think it was still Lotus 123 and WordPerfect. And I think I started using OS2 when OS2 2.1 for Windows was released, which I think was 1993. So for about 21 years or so, I've been dabbling in this stuff. Next slide, Neil. So I upgraded OS2 versions as they're released through to version 4, bought ECS when it was released, and I've upgraded steadily as the builds have been released. In terms of current hardware I'm using here, I've got a T60 that has working wireless that I use for testing stuff, and a Lenovo T10 which is a bit faster machine for testing stuff, but unfortunately the wireless on that doesn't work, which is a pain in the neck. And the machine I use most of the time is a Dell Ultrabook, which runs Ubuntu, and my development environment is virtualized and has been since about 2001, I think. I bought a new machine in about March 2011 and carefully bought all the hardware hoping that it would work, and we had issues getting Panorama working in 1920 by 1080, issues with I think the IDE controller or the SATA controller getting it working, and I then found when I installed Ubuntu and virtualized ECS that my compile times actually improved under the virtualized system better than what they were under the native. And then I thought, shit, this isn't bad. If OS2 crashes, I can reboot without stopping everything I'm doing, and it yeah, I guess the rest is history. So anything on my website released since about April 2011 has been compiled under Linux. Next slide, Neil. Yes. So I forget when, but back when I first got cable internet, Telstra, I guess the monopoly telecommunications provider in Australia, they were the only ones with a high-speed cable network in my area, and Telstra couldn't follow industry standards in terms of cable internet, so they had a log-on client, which of course, whilst it was available for some routers, it wasn't available for OS2. So with some help with some people in IRC at the time, I compiled that. I forget when that was, 93, 94 maybe, I guess. In 2005, people may recall there was a Japanese guy, I forget his name now, got sane working with one particular model, Epson scanner, using a closed source driver. And I wanted a scanner at the time. I wanted to scan some slides and some negatives. So I bought this specific model scanner knowing that it's going to work, except when I got it, yeah, it did work for some things, but really not very well. Around the same time, Bart van Leeuwen, I probably haven't got that pronunciation right, he was working on porting Gphoto, and Marcus Monkowski was working on the USB Res Manager and USB calls libraries. So being I guess super confident and I can do this. I've done a bit of C in uni. I figured, well, if they can get Gphoto working, why can't I get Sane working? So, and other people had Sane building for SCSI scanners, so all I had to do was write a USB library. How hard can it be? So after a bunch of weeks of hacking and some really, really dumb questions, and I guess the point to remember that I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to programming. I mean, 10 weeks in uni does not a programmer make. I eventually got a build working, and it worked for me. Added a build, made it available to some people, and some other Epson scanners worked as well. It's like, excellent. And next slide, Neil. Oh, I've just lost my cursor, that's all right. And so Epson scanners were working using a particular Epson library, and from there I got reports from other people of certain model scanners with different backends, because the way Sane works is it's got different libraries for all sorts of different scanners that, yes, they use some common code, but what I wrote to get working with Epson scanners didn't necessarily work with Canon scanners or HP scanners or whatever. So people decided they wanted to start sending me some money, which I thought, hey, this is excellent. I ended up, I had scanners arriving in the mail almost on a daily basis, which drove my wife crazy with the clutter that was building up in the study. But with having hardware locally, it made it a hell of a lot easier to debug, because sending, particularly with time zones, there's not that many Australian OS2 users, and time zones from here make it hard to have a live conversation with someone. Even on IRC, the overlap between my waking hours and the mainly European users in NetLabs is like an hour in the morning and an hour at night, because I'm at work when they're asleep. They're at work when I'm asleep. It just doesn't work. And I guess the success in getting Sane working, although with the benefit of hindsight, at the time, instead of working on libUSB, which is a cross-platform library for interfacing with USB hardware. At the time, I wrote I thought that was too hard, so I wrote a specific interface that talks directly to USB calls, as opposed to writing something more cross-platform that would have helped other projects down the track. But about 8 or 9 years later, I finally got around to working on libUSB, and some other people worked on libUSB 0.1 earlier, but I ported libUSB 1, I think, early last year, I think, from memory. Next slide, Neil. So for people who want to get started in porting software, so setting up a build environment, which I know when I first got started was one of the things that I really struggled with. So a gratuitous plug, on my website I've got a link that there's a downloadable version and also a version on a disk. And this presentation, I think Neil will get it on the Warpstock website, and I'll throw a link on my website as well. So any links, I wouldn't worry too much. I see the gentleman in the front, it looks like he's trying to scribble down a URL. So my build environment, a bunch of it is hackish, but it works for me. So, and I guess the other way of getting an environment set up that is relatively easy is RPM Yum. I don't have a lot of experience with it myself. I keep meaning to find some time to play with it. I just had 3 weeks vacation and didn't, so I will get around to it one day and try and integrate the stuff I have here with the stuff that's available. I guess one of the things I personally don't like about RPM Yum is if I build stuff with that, I end up with executables that end up with a whole bunch of dependencies on DLLs. If someone has RPM Yum installed, fantastic. If someone doesn't, then they've either got to try and manually put together all those DLLs themselves or install RPM Yum. So I guess I don't like to restrict people or tie in a subset. You know, we're a splintered community as it is, without trying to force everyone to install an environment just to get a small command line executable working, for example. Just my opinion. I guess the thing with porting software, as I said earlier, I asked a bunch of really dumb questions. In fact, asked Steve, and I still ask dumb questions. I'm not a programmer. Have I said that already? I'm always lurking in NetLabs on IRC. So I run Quasel on my server, so I may not always be watching what's happening there, but I always read scrollback either in the morning before I go to work or in the evening when I get home, or every now and then if I'm sat in a really dull meeting at work, I'll log on to Quasel from my phone and see what's going on IRC. So I didn't try and convert time zones, because even in the US there's how many time zones, but generally on most evenings between 6:30 and 7:30 Adelaide time, I'm online. On weekends and things I may be around more often, but it's pretty safe particularly most weeknights that I'm online at those times. And I guess the other thing that amuses me is people decide they want to compile something, and they'll decide they want to compile something like GIMP. They really want to bite off more than they can chew. They'll pick, you know, the most difficult project in the world to compile that people have been building stuff for years and years, haven't tried, and yeah, I've never ported software before, but I'm going to give it a shot. And then when they fail, they're surprised and get disheartened. A lot of Qt applications are really, really easy to build. If you've got a build environment set up, you unzip the source, you run qmake, you run make, and 10 minutes to an hour later, you've got an executable. Things like Quasel, the IRC client that I use, that builds out of the box, has done basically since day one. Really easy to build. And a lot of command line stuff, you run configure from a command line, you run make, and you've got an executable. But you know, your stuff that's anything with a GUI that doesn't use Qt, you're either going to have to write your own PM code, which is way out of my league, or you know, come up with some interface yourself. So Qt stuff and command line is where I would recommend people start. Next slide, Neil. Yeah. So as I alluded to earlier, you know, a lot of people believe they can't program, therefore can't or won't do anything to compile things. And I gave the example earlier, Albert. He's not a programmer. He decided to see if he could try and port stuff because he wanted to do something to help the platform. He's ported over 200 Qt applications and about 40 odd command line applications. His estimates, I asked him on IRC a couple of weeks ago when I was putting this together. And I mean, he's gone and found source for stuff that I would never have even known existed. Where the hell he's found the source for these Qt apps is beyond me. But and if you look at the NetLabs Qt4 apps page, he's updating stuff on a regular basis. It really is amazing, and it's really good to see because there's been a couple of threads on OS2 World in the past where I've tried to say make this same point on people think they can't program and therefore they can't do anything. And if you've got some time, I guess time is one of the biggest factors, and a little bit of nous around if something doesn't work, I'm going to either ask questions or Google for answers or try and help myself versus just giving up at the first sign of failure. So I really think anyone can build software, but maybe that's just the engineer in me. And I think I guess one thing that does help me is I did do 4 years of engineering, and part of engineering is problem solving, and when things don't build, it's problem solving. So it's it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? The 5 whys. Keep asking whys till you get to the answer. Next slide, please, Neil. Yes. So resources, as I mentioned before, the NetLabs IRC channel. So I'm on there a lot. There's a bunch of other really clever guys that hang out on that channel that can answer questions. Lewis, who would like to be in the room but isn't, and hopefully is listening. He did say when we Skyped yesterday he was going to try and tune into the webcast. He has a mailing list, GNU ports, and the links on the screen. Again, the intent of that mailing list is that people can post questions, and there's an archive available online, and hopefully people can search that, and if the same questions come up, that resource continues to be available. Doesn't get a whole lot of traffic right now. How well known the mailing list is, I'm not sure, but hopefully with listing it here, it will get a bit more use. KO, and I'm not going to try and pronounce his name, Korean isn't my forte. He has a blog which I only discovered probably a week or two ago. And that weird, the LVZUUFX, I've got no idea what that represents, but KO does use that nickname or handle on IRC as well, and occasionally he is online on NetLabs as well, and obviously he's ported a whole bunch of stuff like VLC and MPlayer and things, which is, and he's got a lot of information on there. Some of that I'd come up with alternate solutions to, and I guess part of the point of trying to get this stuff public is, and in mailing lists and things, is if 5 different people are coming up with workarounds to the same problem, that's a whole bunch of wasted effort. If we can get some information in a common location and save a bunch of people some time, it's like I say, 5 developers coming up with a solution to the same problem is a complete waste of their time if we can do it once. Also on Usenet, there's a Comp OS2 programming porting news group where people can post questions, and I try and monitor it. And also there's a programming forum on OS2 World where people can post questions. Next slide, please, Neil, while I get a slurp of coffee. Well, firstly, learn. But one of the big things is, and I know that I'm not unique, people who do stuff for OS2 generally don't get a lot of feedback. If something doesn't work, you might get a this doesn't work, but if something works, you basically don't even know whether something works or not. I mean, I released a bunch of new ports a couple of weeks ago whilst I was on leave before I got to a new puppy. So I had 3 weeks off. The first week was a week of vacation. The last 2 weeks were looking after an 8-week-old puppy. So the amount of work done got slowed down in those latter 2 weeks. But I released a bunch of new ports. I could probably count on one hand the amount of correspondence I've had since then on either stuff did work, didn't work, was good, wasn't good, whatever. Good, better, and different. Provide some feedback. Yeah, so without feedback, I guess it's pretty disheartening when you at time, it's something you've slaved hours and hours over. You release it to a website, and yes, it may get a bunch of downloads. Maybe you know how many times it was downloaded, and in fact, that sometimes makes it worse because 100 people downloaded this, and I've got nothing on it. What gives? And the impression you get then is if you're not getting any kind of feedback on the software, well, maybe no one uses it. There's no point spending time updating that. I won't bother updating it. Give up, and it never gets updated again. And if people were actually using it, maybe that's a bad thing. So next slide, Neil. So, provide financial support for people or organisations who continue to support OS2. And this was off the top of my head. If I've left someone off here, I apologise. Making the point, not intended to be a conclusive or extensive list. So Bitwise, who are doing a bunch of really good things over in Europe, they're porting Firefox. They provided the Qt port. They're planning to work on Qt5. Sylvan and Dimitri are doing a lot of good stuff there. KO, I'm not going to try and pronounce the rest of his name. He also has a donation page. I have one myself. Yuri Dario. Yuri is the guy behind OpenOffice, and even things like MySQL, which I now maintain. I originally got patches from Yuri that I've basically shoplifted and used to maintain the newer ports. The original port of CMake, Yuri did. I got his ports. Yes, I've enhanced it and worked on it since, but Yuri's done a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Ecolabs, and I couldn't find the link and I ran out of time and forgot about it. Qt for OS2, there is the Mentis link, but that's probably duplication because I think effectively these days Bitwise are doing most of the work on Qt anyway, or in fact always did. Next slide, Neil. So yeah, just going back on the feedback side of things, if you're reporting a problem with a piece of software, try to ensure the problem is useful. I mean, I've had reports where the program crashes. Full stop, end of sentence. No registers, how to reproduce. You end up, those types of emails, I'm at the point now where frankly I just ignore them. If someone can't give the information to at least try and fix the problem, well, there's only so many hours in the day. You just can't help some people. So the other thing that drives me insane, and probably other people as well, is have people looked at the included documentation. Things like the newer version of GhostScript that requires some changes to GSView to allow it to work. In the README it tells you exactly what you need to do, but the number of questions I got on GhostScript doesn't work with GSView. Have you read the documentation? No. Can you please? And then come back to me. Complaining about something that has already been documented is not useful, and I guess I'll be the first to admit that patience is a virtue that I don't always have, so asking dumb questions does tend to bug me. Report problems via the appropriate forum. So if the developer in the documentation that they've listed with the software has asked for problems to be reported a certain way, either via a bug tracker or a specific email address for feedback, try and use it, because that way you know that the feedback is going to get to the right person. I've come across bug reports in random news groups or random forums, and yes, I've stumbled across them and seen them and been able to help. But if you want to contact me, as an example, there's a contact form on my website. There's an email address in the README with every port that I upload publicly. There's a bug tracker link in there as well. Please try and use it. Next slide, Neil. So Lewis suggested just a little bit on what information is useful if someone's putting in a bug report. So simple things like clearly describing the version of the software being used. If someone says they've got a problem with PHP, I maintain 4 current build levels of PHP, 5.3 through to 5.6, and within that most of them have had multiple releases of different point releases or different attempts to fix problems. Over the last however many years I've been maintaining PHP. So, as I say, unless there's a specific version mentioned, it's very hard to even reference the source or anything. Simple things like detailing what happens and also how to reproduce the problem. Because if I can't reproduce the problem, I probably can't fix it. Sometimes you get lucky and there's enough with a log file or a 6xv registers that are useful, and enough information to try and find where in the source the problem exists, and sometimes you can get lucky. But a detailed reproduction scenario is really useful. And on some things, like with some of the stuff that Stephen and Lewis and I are trying to work on with Apache and PHP, where things happen randomly and there is no reproduction scenario, I understand that. But a lot of things, if it's a crash, repeatable crash, how to reproduce it is useful. Sticking to the facts and leaving emotion out of the report. And I think Lewis definitely knows who I'm referring to there. I won't mention names here, but there's a few people who tend to use very emotional language on mailing lists and things that tend to cloud issues, and yes, they've got some valid points, but there's better ways to deal with it than using all kinds of emotive language. And that's probably enough said there. I've also got a URL here, which is, the whole bug reporting issue is not something that's unique to OS2. That website in particular has a bunch of similar kind of comments to what I've put here on how to provide a good bug report. Be respectful when porting issues. So in a lot of cases, people have spent hours and hours on a port, so if something doesn't behave exactly as you want, cut them some slack. Most of the time, people are doing this stuff effectively for free. Even if you look at, yes, I get a little bit of financial support through PayPal and Mensis, but if I was doing this for an hourly rate, I'd quit. It's not worth it. It's a labour of love. They're also doing this as a hobby. You don't have a right for support. Again, even I got an email a couple of days ago on a guy asking for a filter for cups, and I pointed out that this filter, well, there's nothing for me to compile here. It's a shell script. It's not C code, and I got a but you've got cups filters and you've got Ghost scripts and you've got cups working. Why can't you do this for me? Well, because I don't do shell scripts. That's why. It's like asking me to read a book in German. I've got no idea. So next slide, Neil. Yeah. So this I've alluded to some of this stuff already. Comments like it doesn't work without describing what doesn't work. It crashes without providing logs or a reproduction scenario. The other classic one I've read, which is a real example, again with some words removed to protect the guilty. Why do you work on a particular port? That's a waste of time. You should work on some other random port that really interests me. In this particular case, we were comparing a server daemon, which was the YYY example, versus an IRC client, which was the XXX. And when I pointed out that an IRC client is something that every end user potentially might use, versus a server daemon, which is something that only a very small subset of people might want to use, and bang for the buck wise, I'm going to work on something that benefits more people. And also Quasel I use on my Android phone. I've run it under Windows very, very rarely, but I've run it on my wife's Mac when she's been hogging my computer. I run it on OS2, I run it on Linux, I run it everywhere, and it's something I like, and it's my time, so I'll do what I want. So if you do the things mentioned above, you will annoy the developer, and they are real examples. Yes, there's details removed because I'm not going to single out people, but they are real examples. Next slide, Neil. So things that I'm personally proudest of. Sane, basically because it was the first real port that I did. As I say, I'd compiled a couple of things before that didn't require source changes, but with Sane I had to write some code, and when I look back at it now, some of that was particularly bad code, but it worked, and it's what really got me started in doing this over the last 9 years or so, or whatever it is. Cups. I think it would horrify me if I looked at how much time I spent getting the initial build of Cups working. There were a bunch of libc bugs at the time as well that stop some things working, and if Newt hadn't fixed those, we probably would never have had the build of cups we've got now. And really, a lot of the credit on cups, Adrian Geschwind and Bart van Leeuwen at the time on NetLabs, I really didn't understand what cups was and how this common Unix printing system could help OS2. And if it wasn't for their persistence in trying to explain to me why it would work and why it would benefit, we probably never would have had it. And things like, you can literally walk into a store and buy a current HP printer, and with the open source solutions that HP provide, scanning and printing and work on that printer. 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was, that I got HP Lip working. I put a bounty out there to go and buy a current model HP PhotoSmart printer, and within a couple of weeks got the scanning and printing working on there. It was just something that without having the hardware locally I couldn't do, but having the hardware locally really did help. GCC, the GNU C compiler. Newt obviously provides a port of GCC 3.3.5 as part of libc, but that version of the compiler was released probably close to 10 years ago, and for modern projects it basically can't be used anymore. So we're going, I forget when, probably 4 or 5 years ago, again one of those famous, I can get this to work, how hard can it be? And progressively got, I think, up to about GCC 4.2 built quite easily. 4.3 changed a bunch of stuff with DLL export for building DLLs on Windows, and the OS2 support in GCC was based on the Windows support. So eventually I got that working, and we actually are current on GCC. We have GCC 4.9.1 that works pretty well out of the box. Available for OS2, and without that newer GCC, the current Mozilla builds would not exist. So even the builds that Dave Yo was doing up until recently were with GCC 4.4, I think, from memory, which I hadn't updated for a while. The bitwise ports are done using GCC 4.7.3. They've got their own RPM build of it, but it's all basically my patches. Dimitri did contribute some fixes as well, but yeah, GCC is in a pretty good state, and a staggering amount of time I've spent on that. Almost frightening amount of time. Uniord hasn't been updated for a little while, but when Vladis stopped working on Uniord, his approach, I guess, to updating Uniord was he would grab individual source files from newer builds of the ALSA source engine, the Unix source engine, and bring them across. So there was a whole mishmash of versions of source files in the NetLabs Uniord repository. And at the time we had a lot of hangs with high definition audio, and one of the thoughts, which turned out to be wrong in the end, was that perhaps the fact that the core had been updated in such a piecemeal approach or random approach was the problem. So we figured if we got at least the core up to date with ALSA, that may help fix some problems. So that there was a lot of work to do to try and work out, with creating diffs and trying to work out what was the base version of Uniord used, and then some files had been updated and some files hadn't. But eventually we got Uniord up to a current level. Didn't fix the high definition audio issues in the end. I think David in the end was the one that fixed those, but at least got the core code that interfaces with the hardware up to a then current standard in terms of hardware support. Because as new hardware came out without the core being updated, then that hardware wasn't supported. So yeah, that was a lot of work, and unfortunately the Watcom compiler, or the open Watcom compiler, is used to build Uniord. The ALSA code is built with GCC on Linux. They're starting to use a lot of either GCC extensions to the C language, or more modern aspects of the C language that Open Watcom doesn't support. And the other problem with ALSA is they've now taken it from a standalone module to it's now integrated with the Linux kernel. So trying to pull out the source you need to be able to build it on another platform is more and more difficult. So I think we're on about ALSA 1.0.24, which is 2 or 3 versions behind now. But the current versions are more and more difficult to build. I've had a quick look, but haven't had an opportunity to spend a whole bunch of time on it. And finally, I put on here libUSB 1.0. So as I mentioned earlier, when I built Sane way back when, I wrote a specific interface for Sane to talk to USB calls, which then means anyone else porting a USB program has to re-engineer that solution. And along the way, I forget, Rich Walsh, I think, ported libUSB 0.1. Worked for some things, not for others, but more and more software now is using libUSB 1.0 rather than 0.1. And I guess maybe it was probably more a pride thing, but having done a poor job of writing well, not poor, but a not very clever way of writing USB code back on Sane in 2005, I figured it was a good chance to do it better this time. And that libUSB 1 port is used on my side for Sane and also for cups and potentially for other projects as well. There is things like there's a USB fingerprint scanner software out somewhere that in theory could be built using that library. I haven't done it myself, but there's other projects out there that could use that port. So next slide, Neil, please. So the klibc runtime. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of encouraging news on this aspect over the last few days, but the last release of libc was about 2 years ago. There's a bunch of bugs in there that either require workarounds. There's some functionality missing that creates extra work for developers. Things like some functions there, get address info, poll, select on file handles not working, that require extra work on behalf of the porters. Encouragingly, and Knut Sandosmanson, who's done most of the work on klibc, basically hadn't touched it for a couple of years, but if you look at the NetLab's website over the last 2 or 3 days, there's a bunch of check-ins there and a bunch of tickets closed. So cross your fingers, we may get a new release there soon, which may help the reliability of some of the software that uses libc out there at the moment. And the other challenges are spare time. Certainly on my part, I'm in a reasonably senior position where I work. I work reasonably long hours during the week, and there's nights you get home when the last thing you want to do is touch a compiler, and you end up spending an hour, browsing websites and things and chatting on IRC and not doing anything productive at all. But sometimes you just need that time to recover. So unless I win the lottery, and given I don't buy too many tickets, I don't see that changing anytime soon from my perspective. Next slide, Neil. Yeah, so Qt5. So Qt5 was released in 2012, so coming up to 2 years ago. Our current Qt build is version 4.7. There is a 4.8 build as well that our build potentially could be updated to relatively easily. Other platforms are now up to 5.3.2 at the time I put this slide together. So Bitwise do have a plan to update our port to Qt5, but applications like Scribus, which is a desktop publishing application that I maintain, version 1.5 of that, which is the current release they're working on, will not build on Qt4. So if we don't get Qt5, then Scribus ends at version 1.4 on OS2, and that's just a fact. klibc, so I've put this as a current and a future because if someone doesn't step up to maintain that, and there's been various discussions about potentially forking that code and creating a different release where other developers can work on it. But if that doesn't get action, it'll continue to slip behind other platforms and make ports more and more difficult. And I guess the other challenge, the shrinking user base. So you don't have to read too many forums to see, talk of people, they've got new hardware, it doesn't work, I'm going to go and look at Mac, Linux, Windows, whatever. So, and with with less users, there's less feedback, and any any funding for new projects may suffer. Sorry, I'm just distracted by Andy posting on IRC. He's just giving me some feedback on WPA supplicant that it works well. So thank you, Andy. Next slide, please, Neil. Oh, Q&A. Enough of me. No problem. Sorry, I'm struggling to hear this. In my build environment, I include a copy of the wget source. Something like wget, you can literally unzip the code, run configure, run make, and you get an executable. It builds out of the box, and at least gives some I guess experience of what types of things come up on the screen, how long does something take, but the wget build I include, which I think was 1.1.2, builds out of the box. The latest version did need a couple of little tweaks to the source code. It should be. I haven't built it. You mean just grabbing a copy of GCC off my site as opposed to installing a build environment? Oh, sorry, I heard GCC, not T60. So absolutely. I mean, the T60 is not the fastest machine in the world, but I mean, a slower processor is just going to take more time to build. I often, this laptop here has some kind of i7 processor in. I often am building 3 or 4 things at once, but the beauty of OS2 is that it multitasks reasonably well. So yes, it will chew up some CPU time, but a T60 will do fine. No problem. It keeps me sane. Pun intended. Well, during the week I'm up at 5:15 and start work at 6:10. So and with having a 12-week-old puppy in the house, she was awake at 5 o'clock this morning. So there's no rest for the wicked even on a Sunday. on a work day, I'm at my second or third meeting by this time of the morning. So we're done. No worries, guys. Well, it's nice to talk to you and nice to see you all. No problem. See you guys.